Hey team, welcome back to Dukes on Twitch. Back today with a YouTube exclusive Patreon deck list thanks to that Maverick Joe. This is a green-white Maverick list featuring a new card, Serra Paragon. Serra Paragon is a 4-mana, 3/4 flying angel that during your turn, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. So this is very similar to Kess, a Grixis legendary creature that was printed a little while ago that allowed you to cast a spell, usually I think instant or sorcery. But this is pretty cool in a deck like Maverick where you have a lot of cards going to the graveyard, things like Wasteland, and obviously your creatures in damage-based matchups with things like Lightning Bolt or just creature damage. So Serra is pretty sweet as a card just to get that late game advantage and also have a 3/4 flyer, which isn't too bad in a metagame with DRC and Delver of Secrets. This list has a pretty nice mana base of 3 savannas, 2 plains, 2 forests, 7 fetch lands, and then just a pretty normal sort of utility list with Blast Zone. Blast Zone, a pretty nice way to deal with go-wide strategies in green-white decks like goblins, elves, potentially even taking out a number of 1-drop threats in Delver, and then just generally nice at being sort of a catch-all. Maybe it's an exploration, maybe it's Aether Vial, maybe it's Stoneforge Mystic and some other 2-drops, or just a way to get rid of Mother of Runes after she's been protected and turned on. Blast Zone has a lot of flexibility to it, which I really like, and I think is pretty sweet as a night target. We're running 3 Once Upon a Times, which I think is really nice. Newton's been on Once Upon a Time in Elves for a while. There's been a lot of players testing it out, like Dreadnought 33 in Depths, and doing really well with it in Naya Depths. And you do see it from time to time in Maverick, no pun intended. The Green Suns package is pretty heavy on the full 4 Knights, 3 Endurance, a Tireless Tracker for the grindy matchups, where you just want to be making land drops and potentially drawing some extra cards. Roundup Excavator, really nice at getting things back like Wasteland, but also just being able to get back a Horizon Canopy is pretty strong. Outland Liberator, the choice of artifact or enchantment hate in the main deck. I have been coming around to Outland Liberator as just generally being a pretty solid card, and I do currently like it a little bit more than Night of Autumn, even though Night of Autumn is a little bit more flexible, being something like Gain 4 against Delver. Collector Ouphe is probably one of our last kind of oops I win kind of cards, especially in game 1 against decks like 8cast or Tess, depending on their opening. Spirit of Labyrinth as a 2 of, Thalia as a 3 of, just to make sure that we have some game against sort of the combo decks. Thalia and Spirit are still really strong. I would actually say that Spirit is a little stronger than Thalia at the moment. So that's pretty cool. We then have 3 Solitudes and 4 Swords. I haven't done the math on how many white cards you're supposed to have with Solitude, but because this deck also just ramps in mana and can get to 5 mana fairly quickly before turn 5, we don't always have to pitch it to a card. So it is a nice thing to have, but it isn't relevant to sort of the actual game plan of the deck. And then of course Serra is pretty cool. If the metagame you have is white-based, I would say it's not that great because a lot of your things are getting exiled, but even getting back a fetch land, acting like a Ramanap, or getting back a creature, of course, is pretty powerful, so there's always that. To the board, we have 3 Force of Vigors. I really like the 3 Force. I think Force is a pretty exceptional card. It allows us to keep on par with a lot of the unfair decks in the format. Things like 8cast, which can really just drop their hand on turn 1. Force allows you to have some play there. Shifting Ceratops, really nice against blue-red Delver. They don't really have a way to deal with it other than blocking and then hitting it with a Lightning Bolt. If they're playing Unholy Heat, they could potentially hit it for 6, but typically they're not going to be able to deal with it. No spoilers. Endurance, really nice. I think having the 4th is great. It's great against Delver. It's also great against graveyard decks. Things like Reanimator and Oops. Has a lot of game there. We haven't seen a lot of Scavenging Ooze, especially for the builds playing the full 4 Endurance, but it can be nice to have the incremental advantage of Skoos, so I don't mind having that here. Also against the Delver decks and decks like Lands, where games typically go longer post-board, it is nice to have not just incremental life gain against Delver, getting it to out of sort of bolt range, but also against lands, being able to hit things over certain turns like Loam and Punishing Fire, or just lands that you don't want them to be able to get back with a Loam down the line. Gaddock Teeg. Gaddock Teeg is, I think, has come back in favor the last few months with the uptick in blue-white X decks and elves. They do have ways to deal with it in Grist, Caracas sometimes in the Elvish Reclaimer builds, and Assassin's Trophy. But I think with Minsc and Brew coming back online, there's going to be a lot more Caracas running around, so Teeg bullying out the blue-white X control decks is probably not as relevant as you would like it to be. To Prelate, a little bit of old tech, but hey, we're all here to try that and see how relevant it is right now. Prelate can be pretty nice, but with things like Prismatic Ending being printed, it's a lot harder to be able to lock out your opponent from something for a long time. Even Blue-Red Delver with Bolts and Unholy Heats do still have access to things like Rough Tumble or Submerge against us, so we'll have to look out for those. Thalia Hereticatha, typically a main deck card, but I'm keen to see how it goes in this league and if it comes up in matches where we want it. Because, you know, if we bring in all 5 matches, maybe it's worth actually testing in other decks to see how it performs. Really strong against elves. Bringing in their creatures and cradles tapped really buys us a lot of time. And even just turning on things like Wasteland against decks that typically fetch for basics and hitting their tapped fetches is pretty cool. It's also a creature we can save with Caracas, which is nice. So, you know, taking 3 and being able to return it in response to a Swords or something is pretty sweet. Aven Mindsensor. No Black Splash, so no opposition agent, but I think that Aven Mindsensor is pretty underrated right now. There's a lot of depths running around. There's a fair bit of elves. There's a fair bit of search in general. Obviously, fetch lands are there, but for decks that actually rely on search, things like Crop Rotation, Other Reliquary, Elvish Reclaimer, Green Sun Zenith, Aven's pretty sweet, especially as kind of the old school way of kind of beating the mirror was Avens. So pretty cool to see that back. And then Wings of Abandon, which is pretty much a 2-mana Path to Exile at sorcery speed. However, for Overload, 4 and 2 white, you can pretty much board wipe one side of the board. So against some of the more creature-heavy decks where you can come to a board state where it's kind of a stalemate, Winds can either be an early game removal spell or a late game bomb. So we'll see how that goes. Pretty awesome to see this. A big thank you to Joe who sent through this list from Patreon. If you're a fan, you can definitely find all my Patreon details in the links below this video. A huge thank you to Joe. I'm a big fan, and I love that you sent through these lists to see how they perform. Let's get right into it and go to round 1. Hey team, welcome to round 1. We are on the draw against Ravenous Panda with an okay hand. We have interaction in Swords and Outland Liberator. We have a turn 3 Knight and then Serra down the line, so I'm pretty happy to keep this. There are possibly some 6s that are a little bit better with something like Thalia or Spirit to have something against control, but in testing, I'm pretty happy to see how this plays out. The downside of having the 2 Savannahs and the Plains is that no fetches turn Knight into a 3/3 or 4/4, which potentially play around something like a Bolt effect, but it looks like we're going to be up against another green-white deck. Happy to lead on Plains here as well. I don't want my opponent to go Wasteland Pass, and if we draw into a fetch land, then I can play the Knight out before my opponent gets a chance to Wasteland us. It's going to be lands, which thankfully this Outland Liberator could be pretty good against. The question is, are we in a position where we can play the Liberator out, or should we wait to have the mana open to actually pop it at the same time? Okay, they're going to Loam next turn most likely, so I think we're okay to just say if you have... that's actually interesting, that's a turn 2 play. So they have Windswept Heath and Wooded Foothills in hand and 2 unknowns. I think I really want to be able to get this Outland Liberator online, so I'm actually going to lead on Thalia here. They hit another Loam, Exploration and Crop Rotation. Alright, so they still have 2 unknowns and Loam in hand. That's pretty nice because that is access to a basic. I think I'm happy to play Knight here, but taking them off this Exploration is pretty nice as well. We have multiple answers to Saga and tokens. How do I want to do this? I could play Knight because we have a land in the bin, so they can't currently Punishing Fire it. Land potentially... Knight also turns on Guy's Cradle next turn, which means we could also play the Serra and something from the yard, potentially the land. This is interesting because obviously Exploration plus Loam is very scary. With the Saga, they most likely get Needle if we play Knight, which we can answer with the Liberator anyway. Okay, let's go with Knight. I think getting Knight online is far superior. We can also get in for 2 here because the token will be a 1/1, and on the crackback they'll most likely create another construct and then also have a target from the saga, which makes it a 3/3, so Thalia can't really block. Next turn I'll have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. I nearly have enough to Serra and Liberator in the same turn, so they loan Mox Diamond, Dark Depths, Wasteland. Wow, they get Retrofit Foundry. Didn't expect that. Maybe they don't have Needle in the main deck. Oh, maybe they have Punishing Fire into Bazooka Bog. Oh, Soul Guide. Nice. They only have 2 cards left. Let's go with attack with Thalia, and then play Liberator holding up the basics. We know about Punishing Fire, however. But thankfully next turn we can hopefully draw a land, and then just cast Solitude in their turn. Although, I might also want to hold up mana for Liberator. No attack. Interesting. Obviously keeping it on defense here. I'm pretty happy just to Swords this construct right now. I don't believe they have a Punishing Fire in hand, but potentially they do. Oh no. Maybe I miscalculated that. I saw this one and thought they didn't have it anymore. Yikes. Can Green Suns for 2 currently. Nothing too great. I don't mind just going for a Noble Hierarch, because this is cast. I don't get anything back for free. I guess Collector Ouphe turns off these. Maybe I should have gone for Collector Ouphe there, because that also allows me to play a little bit around this. But we know they have the Punishing Fire online, so that's pretty tough as well. This can also just be activated without mana to exile a graveyard, so they don't need to hold up mana to actually kind of beat out this Serra Paragon. They go Shadow Spear, so potentially they have no targets left in their deck other than Mox Diamond for the Saga. That's pretty nice. That's actually really nice. That means we can attack with the Thalia and then still hold up the Blast Zone here. The question is, do I? Or do I just want to hold up the Solitude? I think using Blast here is just too good. It gets rid of Exploration, Foundry, and Soul Guide. The issue is if we lose the Blast Zone, we lose the Noble Hierarch, and then we most likely lose the Wasteland to Savannah. We have played a land for turn, so I don't believe we can play a land as well with the Serra. Let's have a quick look. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell. Yes, but I believe if we've already played a creature, then a land, sorry, then we can't play another land. So I think I actually am just going to go hold up Solitude and just try to go fast. There's Tabernacle. That's pretty nice with the Loam and Wastelands. Okay. I might as well respond to this, because then they just gain 1 less life. Are they going to Punishing Fire this turn? No, surely they Loam, get back Tabernacle. Still not too bad. We have 3 mana, we have 3 creatures. We can pay for everything here. A fetch land would be kind of nice. Endurance is solid, but sadly here we don't have a green card as well to cast. Luckily they don't have red mana up here, but them returning the Punishing Fires thanks to lifelink from the Solitude is kind of scary. The best time to Punishing Fire the creatures is most likely after I paid for Tabernacle, because then they can also tax me on mana essentially. Okay. So currently no mana up, so we can Endurance here and lose our board, or we can try to draw into a land. I think we can lose the Hierarch and just pay for the Solitude and then hopefully rip a land for the Endurance. I think that's kind of our line here. I don't think we're getting there if we're just passing with Solitude. Oof, not what I want, but we draw a pitch card for Endurance, which is nice. Sadly, this is just going to get out of hand a little bit because of the value from the Loams early on. I will play this. There is a world where we can like Solitude in and then on the stack float mana with Cradle. And if we're just drawing 1 land a turn or 1 card a turn, then there's no point not playing it. Just going to be a pass here, sadly. There is a world where a land into Night is okay because it's above 1 Punishing Fire, but with double Grove, they obviously can double Punishing Fire. They also get Shadow Spear back, which is pretty tough because we Enduranced it back into the deck. I think this all comes back to potentially the line where we went for Night on turn 3 instead of Outland Liberator take out Exploration. Goes to show how, in this case, mistakes can snowball, and 10 turns later, it leads to a loss. But not interacting with my opponent's graveyard when they have double Loam, double Punishing Fire online for so many turns, I think it's pretty hard to turn around from, especially with just 1 Endurance. Quickly looking at the board, I like a lot of this. I like the Avens for Crop, for Saga. I like the Prelates on 2. I like the Thalias. I like the Endurance and the Scavenging Ooze and the Force of Vigors. But obviously I don't want to over sideboard either. I will Solitude here. No. But that does buy us some time. That's pretty cool. With the trigger of Tabernacle in the stack, sacking it to create a 4/4 construct. Noble does pay for itself, but I guess I could keep it if I wanted for the other copy of Endurance. But I think at this stage, it's really just getting information about my opponent's deck. and maybe seeing if there's anything off, like main deck Retrofitted Foundry, which could be stock these days for lands. I'm not too sure. But if they're playing something like a currency converter, that'd be cool to know about, with how aggressive they might be in their opening hands. This board is pretty funny. Okay, that's a start. But we do know about Punishing Fire. They also have the Soul Guide Lantern, so I'm actually going to keep that. There is a world, I assume they don't have Pith Needle main deck, but just in case they do, and they didn't get it for the Knight because they had an answer to the Knight, I'm pretty happy to go and get another basic here. Getting a Forest because that casts Endurance. And that is most likely going to be game one. Sideboarding, I like to take out things like Thalia and Spirited Labyrinth. They're typically quite easy cuts. The Solitudes I could see coming out as well, because we are going to be finding a lot of answers post-board for things like Urza's Saga. I'm not sure about 2 Paragons. I do like 1, but I definitely like the Force of Vigors. I really like the Endurance and the Scavenging Ooze. I like the Sanctum Prelates. I like the Thalias. I'm not too sure on the Avens, but definitely interesting. There could be a world where I cut down on Once Upon a Times for Aven. I think this is pretty cool. I want my Mana Dogs. I want the Swords. We do have a lot of 3-drops now, so I do want to make sure we have a pretty nice hand in regards to mana, because that's where lands can really hurt us. Thalias in the board are definitely interesting. There are a few matchups where I want it, but I'd probably like it in the main deck, but we'll see how it goes. Always happy to test a new deck or new deck list without making any changes. This is a mulligan with no lands. This is a nice hand, slow, but we'll keep it. I'm going to bottom the Forest, as the Blast Zone is just a nice out to something like Exploration. I could also drop the Swords, but just in case they're on a Reclaimer build, I'm going to keep it. I could lead on Plains here, but that does open me up to Port. Misty opens me up to not being able to Swords on turn 1. I'm happy to go Misty Pass. This is where Force of Vigor would be pretty excellent. Grafdigger's Cage. Okay. That turns off Green Suns. Wasteland. I don't mind Wasteland here, taking them off the Saga, but I might just do it in Upkeep, because if they have Crop Rotation, at least then they use the mana on their turn. A little bit tough, because now this also gives them a Saga that will just trigger in main phase as well, pretty much putting them back to just having it. So really they just traded the Wasteland for the Crop. But they did tap the Mox in here, so they don't currently have access to creating a Saga, which is pretty nice for us. Might as well try again. I want to do it now so they don't have the mana to actually create the 2/2. Wow. Double Crop. But no land drop, 3 cards in hand. Interesting. Now it's a little bit tough because I kind of want to get a Savannah with the Misty, but I don't want to open myself up to Wasteland, but I also like to be able to cast Knight next turn as a 5/5. I assume we see Lantern from the Saga. They get another Moxen. Okay. Another Knight. A little bit punished there for not getting the Savannah because Prelate there would have been great. Wow, Bolt. Interesting. Didn't expect that. I will get Savannah here, I think. I could just get the Plains. Yeah, let's just go Plains. We saw Bolt, but I'm pretty happy to Prelate for 2 here because it turns off Loam and Punishing Fire. Their Blast Zone can currently go up to 2 counters, but hopefully we can get Knight online for a Wasteland before then. Don't have to worry about any flash creatures, which is awesome. I can't Misty for Dryad Arbor because of the Grafdigger's Cage, but I think that's okay. No great blocks here, unfortunately. I could fetch and trade, but I don't want to do that knowing that Knight is my out to Blast Zone here. I don't want to go down to 3 because I don't want to turn on Bolt just being lethal. I'm happy to play the other Knight and then just hold the Reminap. Here I'm happy just to get the Wasteland and Blast Zone. Wasteland and Blast Zone. Stage for turn is fine. Stage can copy Blast Zone if they want another one, but we do have another Wasteland left. Nice. On the draw, no real changes. There is consideration for the Once Upon a Times digging, but not too sure how much I need them. We also haven't seen Elvish Reclaimer, but I assume they're playing Endurance in the 75, so I think we're just going to run this back. I don't mind this hand. It has Termine Acceleration and then 2 good 3-drops, so pretty happy to keep this. A little bit open to Wasteland, but having the basic Forest is pretty huge. Oof, opponent goes to 4 cards. That's actually quite good here. I could Wasteland the stage, but is that really doing anything? I think I'd rather go Forest Pass. This is now Mulligan to 5. Map is going to be fine. You can see now how good at this Aven would have been if we had an extra. I'm going to play the Wasteland and pass, just because I don't want to show off the white source just yet. Alright. See if they fetch first or map. They're going to fetch, that's fine. The fetch can only get, obviously, jewels or basics, so I'm happy to take out the map here instead. Although the map is more likely to hit, because the map can get any in the top 4, so maybe it's actually incorrect. And I should have just tried to hit the Wooded Foothills. Yeah. Okay. Make a Caracas. I should have actually thought about that a little bit more. Oh, they're going to go for it here. Well, we have the Caracas, which is tough for them. I think I'm actually going to allow them to have the Taiga and hold up. Actually, I'm just going to play the Ramanap here. And if they want to loam, we have Endurance for that off Green Suns. Well, we got it. But a Mulder 4 is obviously very tough to come back from. The Grafdigger's Cage was quite nice, like hitting both Green Suns. But yeah, really happy to get that. We'll see you in round 2. Hey team, we are on the play here, in the dark with Collector Ouphe and Swords. This is a pretty interesting hand because we have 4 lands, so I'm not really enticed into green sunning for Dried Arbor turn 1. The Ouphe could be dead, and as this is green-white without Grist, we don't have a great way of giving it a role in a matchup where it's irrelevant like Elves. Swords is nice. I think there is a better 6 here with a little bit more of a plan, because land pass, potentially Swords, into land Collector Ouphe, or Green Suns for Noble Hierarch, which isn't great either because we don't want a Green Suns for Dried Arbor anyway. I'm happy to mulligan this. Yikes. We do have a turn 2 Labyrinth that we technically do have a turn 1 Noble if we want to pitch the Endurance to tap Cradle, but I think we keep this and just go with dropping the Knight. The reason that I want to drop the Knight here is that potentially we could just get a free win with Endurance, pitch Noble. I want 2 lands for Spirit and I want the green source for Noble, so Knight's going to go back. We're going to lead on Plains Pass here. A little bit like a Death and Taxes opening with Plains Spirit. Definitely one of the weaker starts, but another Windswept Heath deck. Who would have thought? Another lands deck. Okay. Well, oh, Bant lands. Interesting. Second Noble is not fantastic. No Engine yet either. They could potentially untap and loam, but Exploration by itself isn't that great. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to be 8 Mulch, which is pretty scary here. There's a loam in the bin. There's a second Exploration. And they're going to go wide pretty fast here. So we pay for the Spirit. The Cradle then answers the Tabernacle, which is nice, but we only get to cast 1 creature. Oh no, okay. So, this is actually a pretty cool play, because we want to get rid of this loam in the bin. So we're going to go Cradle, cast Endurance, pitching a Noble. Potentially should have pitched the Bird, because Noble with Exalted is a little bit better. And I think that's actually correct. I think I should have gone with the Noble, because it is Exalted, of course. Unless we get to a stage where Field of the Dead gets online and Bird in the Air with Exalted gets there. So with the triggers on the stack, we can tap this for 2, and then play out Noble and Bird, and then attack for 4. It does actually change the clock as well, unfortunately. I think that, hopefully, it doesn't come down to the Mist Exalted. I think it was the Maze hand. Oof, that's really good here. We don't have a great way to deal with Maze other than Wasteland, and Stage means they have a second copy, potentially, of Maze of Ith. No reason here to attack with everything, but this deck doesn't typically run crop rotation, I believe. Maybe it does, but I know there's a big difference between 8 Mulch and lands, and I feel like it's crop rotation. It could also be Wasteland that's missing, but the Maze of Ith are really tough, especially for a deck like Maverick, which likes to kind of work its way around. Okay, so they do play crop. Probably just going for field here. Yeah. I don't think we have a great way to get out of that, especially with the Maze open, or the Thespian stage, I should say. Alright, so very similar approach. The forces are great, the Scoos, the Endurance. The Prelate on 2 still stops Loam and also Mulch. The Thalias and the Avens. The Winds are very interesting as well, because they can be overloaded, so we'll see how that performs. Same thing with the Thalias and the Spirits. I could see both Serras in this version, just because they are flyers as well. Solitudes aren't great, and it could just be the onces. Swords I don't mind just because it's instant speed. I might just go down to... I think they run Mox Diamond. Let me have a quick look. 1. Okay, as a Saga target. It does run Map and it does run Soul Guide Lantern, but I think here the Ouphe can go. And potentially 1 Swords, especially on the field plan. This hand is okay, but a little slow. I think I want to mulligan to either Mana Acceleration or a Force of Vigor hand. This is neither of those. I think we have to go to 5. I don't think this is good as like turn 2, turn 3s. Okay, this is, again with the Cradle hand, unfortunately. I don't really want to go to 4, but yeah. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, not great. Maybe just a little bit of an over consideration on the mull, but I don't think those hands, although we had spells to cast, were going to win us games. Don't really want to wasteland here. Like, this is most likely holding up crop. Like, I don't think there's any other reason why you keep a 7 that starts on Savannah with no turn 1 other than having crop rotation. Not too bad. That is a card that has text. Surely, yeah, I was going to say, surely they use maze there. This does take me off the Force of Vigor for a turn. Sure. Pretty happy to hit the maze here, untap, eat the loam, and then start attacking. But surely that was all a bait. Surely they have, like, land, mana bond, go off. It has to be. Just, it feels wrong. It feels like something's happening. It feels like I'm at the wrong battle of like 500 men and there's another battle going on where like 5,000 men have come. It feels like a trap. This doesn't feel real. I mean, if we really wanted to be safe, we could hold up Knight for Cradle. It's not my jam. Sure. What do you discard? Oh, Ramanap? Okay. That does change things, I think. I think in that case, we want to cast Ramanap, get back Wasteland, use the floating green to eat Loam. Wow, we won that on a Mulder 4. We won that on a Mulder 4, and our opponent didn't really do a whole lot with their opening hand. So I'm not too sure what they had. And, like, potentially the Wasteland was what was keeping them at bay. Because if they kept a mana bond hand with field as the payoff, I can Wasteland the field in response to the triggers, and just like Valakut, it also fizzles if the field is no longer there. But having the Loams in hand makes me think they should just go for it, take the Wasteland, and then just loam it back and start creating 2/2s that way instead of trying to go for all of them straight away. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe they just kept a shady hand and thought it would get there, but thankfully it did not. Do we want to change anything? I don't think so. I think we're just going to try to get a 7 and, you know, let's learn a little bit. Let's maybe not mulligan so aggressively. This is a fine hand. We have Force, we have 2 lands, and we also have just some hard-hitting cards, but I think this is okay. It's a little bit slow, but we have a lot of good draws. We also have access to both basics, which is really nice. So I'm pretty happy just to force this right now, because that's a real big card. Ooze is pretty nice. It's a turn 2 play, but definitely not letting them untap with the mana bond. It's a really good turn. Stage, Maze, Otawara. Ramanap is a land. The mazes are actually pretty terrifying. The land there is huge. So we are just going to play Thalia here, and then next turn we can play Ramanap, get a land back, and also cast Aven, I believe. I mean, if they have it, they could just crop here. Oh no. Oh good, they're copying. Oof. Oh, they're copying Cradle. Interesting. I wonder why. Okay. Guess that means they have field. Just tough. Not too much we can do about that. Like, it's really just Wasteland or bust. Like, we did take care of the first mana bond, but the next one's pretty hard to do anything about. This now doesn't tap for mana until end step. Wow, they have Loam as well. Yikes. They actually screwed up because they should have, been able to copy the field with the trigger on the stack, but they chose not to. Alright, what are we doing here? We're definitely eating the Loam. They're down to 0 cards, but they're going to get a bunch of zombies. So I think we maybe just don't get a land back this turn with Ramanap. Unless we do, because maybe we want to get Dried Arbor so we can block a zombie and then make this a 3/3 going forward. So we want to go... Yeah, that means we can't cast the Aven, but I think that's okay, given that for 1 turn, they don't draw into a search ability. So if we go Ramanap, then we have a green left over for Skoos to eat the Loam, and then we have the Windswept back this turn. Okay, we got a plan. Looks like they're just going to copy field here. Means 6 tokens for every land. I will fetch here for Arbor. It's kind of 2 mana with the Cradle, which is nice. That's also quite nice because it is a creature we can eat at instant speed to take care of either of these. That's also going to flip most likely. I'm also just going to play this now and then pass. Again, the maze is just really holding us off here. Wasteland's the big card we want to find. These zombies are going to get out of hand pretty fast. Alright, so what do we want to do here? Block, 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 block. Before damage... I guess I don't need to block here, but I will take out the exploration, eat that creature. Having a 3/3 isn't too bad either. Did we bring in both wins or just the one? Okay, we brought in both wins. That's not great. The Blast Zone here as well is just so strong. Wasteland, Wasteland. Yeah, that's just game. Tough. We'll see you in round 3. Not too much to say. Hey team, back for game 3. On the draw, this hand is pretty nice. We have a 1, so we have great mana. We have Endurance and Serra to hopefully get into play and test out. Not too sure where our opponent is on, but having access to basics is also, again, really nice. Just to make sure our mana plays pretty well. This is fine. Turn 1 Ponder means a lot of things. Most likely blue-red, but you never know. I'm going to start with once, because finding something like Wasteland would be pretty cool here. We do find it. Blue-red Delver it is. So now they know the top card. Let's go Misty, because you can get basic Forest. The Windswept Heath can get either basic Forest into Noble Hierarch. Daze is fine. Wow, they bottom a Brazen Borrower. That's really interesting. It's a pretty good card in any sort of matchup, especially if they see Once Upon a Time Wasteland Endurance. They probably think that this is going to be Depths, so didn't really expect that. Another DRC is a little bit concerning. I could Wasteland and Green Suns for Dryad Arbor. I don't mind that. I think here I actually have to pitch Endurances just because of the damage race, which kind of sucks, but I think it's too much damage if we allow both of these to be online. They also didn't have a land last turn, so hopefully this Serra can buy some time if we get there. They find a land. Come on, 2-drop or 3-drop. Yikes. Definitely not what we want. I don't think we can play the Serra into Daze either. Wasteland's very good for them. I guess we take the Spirit, but not great. Especially with Daze most likely in hand. Or just Force. Keep on top. They bottom a Wasteland. Okay. Potentially looking for another blue card or blue land to cast DRC, cast Murktide. Just didn't really line up. Alright, to the board. What do I want to bring in? I want to bring in the Shift, Endurance, the Ooze, the Wings as removal. I don't mind the prelates on the play. The Tireless Track is way too slow. Ouphe, Liberator, Caracas. I potentially need the land though, but 22 lands is fine. Maybe not. I don't think I can skimp on land. It's definitely a way we lose this matchup. The Serras are just way too slow as well, unfortunately. I don't think relying on a 4-drop uncounterable card is really going to get us there. Roundup's nice, Endurance is nice. Prelates on 1, Solitudes. Could just be cutting down on onces. It's really just a case of finding that right side of the deck with this hand with this deck, and sadly this isn't it with the mana. Oof. Okay, we can keep this bottom a Noble, and then try to once into the other land. I don't mind that, but obviously something like a Blazing Volley or End the Festivities is pretty brutal here. Okay, we find Savannah, which is nice. Wow, Force. That makes me think they don't have a End the Festivities, which is quite nice for us. It's a pretty big win for us. Force pitch Murktide. Okay, interesting play. They also just 6th there. I'm not too sure what that was about. Expressive Iteration, rough. Okay, no land is pretty huge. See, now we have a very reactive hand, which is where I don't want to be. I could get Dryad Arbor, but I really appreciate the basic planes. If they bolt Thalia here, I don't mind just swordsing this Delver in response. Keeps it off the field, which is nice. Can't be countered, which is nice. This is where I kind of like choke, where the game can really slow down. Just gonna hit this Delver. I don't believe they play a second basic. Well, that's pretty nice. We just need to get to the next land. So now we have a lot of live draws, which is great. Because another threat is great. A land is great. Everything's great. Yeah, 3rd iteration for the turn is pretty tough. Pretty happy just to swords this in response now. We have the Shifting Ceratops for the Brazen Borrower. But if they have a Murktide, then I'm pretty happy to hit that. Because the 3 I'm happy to take, but the nothing. Interesting. Okay, they're down to 3 cards. Reach, Trample, or Haste. Cool. Has to attack. Yeah. Oh, I meant to... That's all good. Let's, before damage, swords it. Because I do want to get rid of it, so this is fine. Hardcast Force is a thing, but thankfully that is not. Yeah, we do have to give it reach before going to blocks. That's just a little thing to be wary of. Means it gets to attack, which is pretty cool. That's your turn. Alright. Ooh. Does this resolve? They could have also returned the Mystic there, but chose not to. No green mana for that. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Shifting Ceratops. Who would have thought? Alright, let's go to game 3. I don't think I want to change anything. Like, I don't think Aven is worth having just as a flyer that can kill Delver. Serra's interesting, but I don't think it's better than anything in the deck. It's tough because Devil's Advocate is that it's a 4 mana, 3/4 flyer, which does block a lot of things, but doesn't get around Daze. But we do bring in a lot of removal and ways to draw out the game that I could see it, but I think Shifting Ceratops is just the better 4-drop, and I don't want to have multiple 4-drops in my opener, so I'm okay with this. I want 3 lands and a removal spell, and then I'll keep, no matter what. 3 lands, removal spell, that's exactly what I want to see on the draw. Oh, we're also 2-0, right? 3 lands, removal spell, sweet. Alright, Daze is fine. No flip is pretty huge. I don't mind holding up Dryad Arbor here in case the Delver doesn't flip, which if it eats a bolt, then that's 1 less bolt for the Scoos. Spirit's pretty nice. I think Spirit here is better because Ooze coming down with a green source would be really good. There are 3 cards. I've used 2 dazes. I don't mind just jamming Prelate here, naming 1. That's pretty huge. Bolt, Brainstorm, Ponder, and the Festivities. A lot of things here. Wow. Oh, we're actually 1-1. We lost to our field, of course. Still no Delver flip. That was a turn 1 Delver, right? Wasteland's fine. Murktide is fine as well. Let's eat Noble. Let's eat Spirit. They have 2 cards left. Nice. They do get a basic here, unless they have it in hand. And I'm actually happy to jam the Ramanap. Actually, they didn't force that, and I don't think they have days, so I'm just going to go with Night here. And getting Wasteland online is much better than anything else. Rough Tumble is good. Rough Tumble turns on 1-drops again, but they're going to Iteration first. Okay. We also have Blast Zone for these if the Night resolves. No attacks? No Rough Tumble? What are they submerging? The Night. Okay. Eat your DRC. Okay. They're down to 0 cards. Nice. Very cool. Nice to take that one. Obviously a lot of back and forth, but we did okay. Probably some little things I could change there as well, but always happy to come out on top. Update the score. We'll see you in round 4. Hey team, on the draw, round 4, with a pretty nice hand. We don't have a mana accelerant, but we have Sword into Thalia into Endurance into Tracker. It's a pretty good curve against really any deck. Forest, Green Suns? Okay. Now the question is, how much do I care about the Green Suns? Once is pretty nice, because I could once into Wasteland. We don't, but I will take probably the Solitude in this case. It's definitely interesting. If this is Elves, I want the extra removal. If this is Depths, I want the extra removal. We already have 1 Endurance, which is enough for really both. I think the Serra's a little bit too much late game, so Solitude kind of saves me from not dying, which is nice. I am going to go after their mana here. Seiju makes me think this is going to be Elves. Okay. Another Solitude. I think in this case, I just want to play the Thalia to tax them somewhat, and then Solitude the Revoker. Sorry, the Reclaimer. Just to keep them off Cradle. No land, no 1-drop? Interesting. In that case, I actually like Night here to turn on Wasteland more than anything else. Oh, we also have Blast Zone if needed. Oh, we actually drew the Blast Zone. Wow. Well, we're just going to pop that right now. They didn't even return something. Interesting. This is working out pretty nicely. But you never know with Elves. It only takes 1 turn for them to really come back. I'm going to get my own Cradle here and play the other Night to turn on Lethal next turn. Wow. Who would have thought that was how the match was going to play out? I did not see that coming. So straight away we have some pretty easy cuts. Outland Liberator, Collector Ouphe, Tireless Tracker for the most part. Probably the Serras as well. But they're definitely interesting to think about. I do like the Gaddock Teeg, the Mind Sensor, the additional wings, the Thalias, the Prelates, and also the Endurances aren't that great either. I could also see a cut down on Thalia. Potentially keep in an Endurance, but there's no real need for it. Like, they don't typically run Ooze anymore, so it's not like they can gain life. I could see the Serra potentially, but I think it might just be the Tracker. It's a Green Sun's way to try to get out of board states. Board stalls, I should say. So we have Gaddock Teeg for opposing Green Suns in Natural Order. Obviously it turns off our own Green Suns, but I think this is a case of Green Suns being more important for them, and of course Natural Order, so that's really nice. Mind Sensor is great for fetch lands, Green Suns, Natural Order, Elvish Reclaimer. Prelate typically on 4 to stop Natural Order. Thalia Heretic Cathart is really nice as they're a creature-based deck, and it also means Cradle comes in tapped, and then just extra removal because they run a lot of creatures. If the board game does stall, we can overload it potentially, which would be pretty cool. The Ooze I think I actually like Ooze over Tracker, just because the incremental life gain can be relevant. But I would say it's not really a card for the matchup, it's just better than something else. This is going to be a mulligan. Like, we hit our land drops, but I really want to keep a 2-lander with most likely mana acceleration and maybe 2 pieces of removal, or 1 piece of removal and 1 8-piece. Alright, this is close to a keep if this was a colored land, but I can't keep this on the draw. Like drawing a fetch land is perfect, but it really leaves it up to that, and if not, we just die on the spot. So pretty happy to mulligan this to 5. I think here I'm going to drop the Ooze. Prelate's nice, but we're pretty far from casting it. Solitude also just puts us down a card. We have the Blast Zone, so I think it might just be this. Would love to see like a Bayou or a Green Suns for Arbor. No. We do find a Windswept Heath. We also find a Plains. The life could be relevant, so I don't mind just taking the Plains. I also don't really want to see any of these other than swords, so I'm actually just going to take the plane so we don't shuffle everything back. It seems like a cradle kind of turn. Wow, they're not even going to cast cradle. Speaking of cradle, they could also be sandbagging cradle for this turn. I could see that happening. Interesting. They do have mana for natural order here. Fiend's pretty cool. I don't mind Green Sun's Fatigue here off the Blast Zone. Could also play Wasteland into Teeg. I think that's better. And not show the Blast Zone just yet. I could play Caracas though. That'd be a little bit annoying. But that would also keep them off getting a Cradle, which is nice. But they go for Cradle. Okay. They currently have 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. Blast Zone surprising me as well with how good it has been. Obviously Delver has a lot of turn 1 threats. Decks like Elves and Goblins have a lot of pesky threats at 1-2. Against lands, it's quite nice to have something for exploration. Once is a good sign for us. It means they're actually looking for something, they don't just have a plane already in hand. Verdant's fine. Unless they want to fetch maybe a Black Source. Okay. And then try to, like, Assassin's Trophy, then Natural Order? Wrist. Okay, that's pretty cool. Oh, they tick up. Okay. Land isn't great. I think just going with the Blast Zone here is best. Deals with these 3. And then no great attacks. But obviously that's also quite bad because Grist gets so big. That's another good reason to keep Ooze in if they're on the Fiend Artisan plan to keep this down as a threat. But wow, they're just going wide. I want to find a Knight ASAP, but this Grist is also keeping things at bay. This is quite scary because this just means that they don't worry about the Gaddock Teeg anymore. Because if they draw into Natural Order, they can just sack one of these tokens to kill it. And then also just sack the other token to actually Natural Order. That's why I would. Okay. 5 mana. They could get Shriek more if they had an extra mana into that. They're going to go for another Fiend Artisan. Okay. Just play the fair game. Yeah, we'll just lands over here. I probably don't even want to show the prelate. I think we just concede at that point. No changes. Just try to maybe draw into the right side of the deck. This is probably not it. We can Green Suns for like 1 and then Green Suns for 2, but only the wings as removal isn't that great. This is better. This is actually a lot better. I'm going to go turn 1 Dryad Arbor off Green Suns. Turn 2 we have Spirit. Turn 3 we have Thalia. I could also turn 2 Thalia. That's actually pretty good as well. So I think we definitely bottom the forest here. And then our play looks like this. And it keeps 7. Turn 2 Thalia against the creature deck is exactly where I want to be. Wow, they go for Bayou. Interesting. I feel like I want to wasteland that and play Spirit. But I think Thalia is just better. It just impacts the board a little bit more. It also hits fetches, which is really nice for us with this second wasteland, which otherwise might not hit it because they can fetch up a basic. This does also open up Grist, though. I should have thought about that. Maybe that's why they got the Bayou. Or Assassin's Trophy. Oh, just a tapped land. That's huge. They did have to have a basic there to play Grist. Tough one. Let me know in the comments. Do you like their Wasteland Spirit, or do you like Turn 2 Thalia? And thanks for watching. Green Suns. Most likely Elvish Reclaimer. Now this is tough. I could play the Knight. Knight gives me access to... I think Knight's best because it means Wasteland this turn and then Blast Zone the following turn. Taking them off the Bayou means they can't fetch an untapped source there, which is quite nice for us. An untapped black source, I mean. Thalia pretty fantastic in this matchup. If you do have a lot of elves locally, definitely consider Thalia Heretica Thar. Especially in this tech compared to something like Death and Taxes, where you can get it down as early as turn 2. Very strong there. Also quite good against Sneak Attack because the creature comes in tapped off Sneak Attack. Well, they play a Cradle, but tapped. So now we get to do something a little bit cheeky. We get to attack with Thalia, which they can block with Reclaimer and then fetch if they want, but then we can Blast Zone. And in response to the fetch, we can also Wasteland the Cradle potentially if we want. But Cradle without creatures isn't that bad. We're going to take the bait. So they will sack, most likely for a forest here. So what we're going to do is... I should have actually played the Spirit turn 1, main phase 1, but that's fine. We're going to sack this so they can't get any sort of value off the Reclaimer. And then go for 3 and 1. Sack this. I actually didn't need to tap the Blast Zone. For a second I thought I had to tap for the Knight. Get Blast Zone. A little bit clumsy there, but I think that's okay. They do potentially get to Once Upon a Time here. If they get a forest and then use that mana floating. Seiju. That's actually fine. That actually gives us the mana to play Spirit, which is nice. And now we also just nearly have lethal because their creatures come in tapped. They can't really stop this damage, which is going to be for 13. Yeah. Like if we draw a Wasteland, we can Wasteland ourselves. I'm going to hold this as unknown information. But pretty hard for my opponent to win from this spot. Alright, well, we get up against elves, which I don't usually say on green-white, so that's pretty cool. We'll see you in the 5th and final match. Hey team, welcome back to round 5. We are on the play with a 2-lander double endurance double Serra hand. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't think it really has that much of a plan. We have no turn 1, turn 2, which I think is where Maverick really sets up a board state that either pressures our opponent or makes them have to play around something to win, like a Thalia or a Spirit. I'm pretty happy to mulligan this. We're nowhere near casting Serras, and the endurances and swords might just be irrelevant, so... okay. I'm probably just going to bottom 1 once here. I could potentially drop the Liberator, as it could be just dead, and once is still a decent turn 2 play. I don't mind that. We can also turn 1 Dryad Arbor for turn 2 Knight. I think here it's just going to be Serra, probably the coolest card we can play around with. Savannah, Dryad Arbor, Unmask. Okay, so this is most likely going to be Reanimator. Taking the Knight here seems really good. Thankfully, a small subtle thing here is that Dryad Arbor allows us to play around the Archon sacrifice if they try to exhume after taking a creature here. But then we do have to draw it literally into Swords to Plowshares. They take the once. Interesting. Maybe they're thinking of endurance. So maybe they don't go off this turn and go off next turn. I just want to keep us off literally that line of oncing into endurance. Or they do have exhume but don't want us to get back a creature. Funnily enough, that turn 1 hand of swords and double endurance would have been pretty nice. Ritual potentially into Thoughtseize themselves and then exhume. Alright, that is going to be it. Not a whole lot in the board for this deck. We can safely take out Tireless Tracker, Ramanap, or Ooze Endurance. I don't mind the wings as just extra removal, but sorcery speed removal is pretty rough. This is probably the one matchup where I'd really love to see Path to Exile in this slot. I think the 1 mana is just a lot better than the flexibility of this being a board wipe. Especially in a lot of matchups like Goblins or Elves where you're typically just going to die before this comes online. Swords, yes. These, yes. I could see the Blast Zone coming out. Mana Acceleration is great. Endurance is great. Serra is a little bit too slow. On the play, I don't mind Prelates. They're a little bit awkward though, because a lot of our good spells are 1 at Source Plowshares and 2 at Wings. Aven's interesting because it turns off Entomb, but that's really it. Like, Teeg turns off Unmask, but most of the time before you get Teeg down or find it, they're going to be unmasking you anyway. I could see, like, a Force of Vigor because of Animate Dead. It's actually a tough one. I think it just is an Aven. Really heavily relies on Endurance. I've always thought about a Maverick deck that plays Chromox in the board as a way to turn 1 hate bears like Thalia and Spirit against fast combo. I think there's some, like, really cool space around that. I've seen it before in, I think, Soldier Stompy, or some other sort of like Dead Guy Ale decks where in the sideboard they have like 4 Chromox as just a way to like turn 1 a Bob or turn 1 a him, or yeah, just have a bit more game on turn 1. And obviously opening yourself up to a 2-drop on turn 1 opens up way more lines and hands that are keepable based on what you have. Like turn 1 Thalia against them seems really strong. Turn 2 Thalia, not that great. Especially when it's like end step or in response, Entomb, untap, play a land, reanimate. We're gonna mulligan this. No hate pieces. Well, they joined. They haven't chosen to keep yet. This isn't great. Like, one of the lands isn't even Caracas, so... guess we'll keep this and bottom a land. Bottom a land. Okay, and this. I'm not gonna once just yet. I'm not gonna play the Noble either. I'd rather hold up swords. This allows me to have, in response to an unmask, both swords and also potentially once for endurance, pitch Noble. Luckily, the Wings of Abandon also mean we're not dead of just to the White Angel. I guess Iona is, but the one that allows them to name instant or sorcery, or creature, or planeswalker, or land, I think. You can name card type. Show and Tell, potentially? Guess we want in response. Alright, well, we get a free Noble. It's pretty good. Tough. I don't think we can mulligan again. I think the chances of hitting an endurance are pretty high. But yeah. Nothing like Deafening Silence or Swords, or really any like good combo hate in the board. A lot of like 3-drop hate, which is a little bit too slow in 2022. That, like, I would say that Prelate is fine against some decks. Just because we have the Paragon typically doesn't mean that we have the luxury of going to like 3-drops for our combo hate. But cool to try it out. Cool to at least try it and see how it performs. But opponent with 2 mana here and 14 cards in hand, I assume we'll definitely at least get 1 more creature into play, if not 2. Looting's fine. Archon. and Child. Okay. So they're actually more of a Tin Fins build. This is where I kind of like the Force of Vigors. Obviously, not in this position where our hand has been pulled apart, but it definitely does more, I think, than other cards in the deck, potentially. I think we actually don't have a way to get back from this, so I'm just going to concede there. But hey, we finished 3-2, which isn't too bad. I'm not too unhappy with a 3-2. Keeping our head above water is always nice. To the deck, pretty strong. I think like the core of the deck is nice. The Serras weren't great, and I think a big part is being able to find them in positions where you want them. I think Serras are great in a Fiend Artisan shell, not so much in just a version with onces, which can dig for them a little bit. We are playing 2 in this version, so you're going to see it a little bit often. We did see it a fair amount. It just never really came up to be that great in the positions we were in. And the rest of the deck was pretty fine. Like, I think there's definitely some flex around, like, these. We could play something like this, and then 1 less Thalia and put in 4 Fiend Artisans here. Probably take out the Tracker and add in a Grist as our kind of way to generate some advantage. And then maybe even like add a second Endurance to the board and bring in something like a Renegade Rallier, which I've been really liking with not just Fiend Artisan, but other aspects of the deck, like Wasteland, Fetches. Obviously, pitch cards like Endurance or Solitude is pretty cool as well. Yeah, really cool to see people playing around with it. Like, nice to play Blossom again. Blossom was actually really good this league. I really enjoyed playing with that. Wings was fine, but I think I much rather the instant speed of Path to Exile if I'm running this. We don't have a board wipe against some of the decks where we want it, but I guess we do have Blast Zone, so I would say Blast Zone fills that role of if we do need a board wipe, we have Blast Zone, not so much the overload of Winds of Abandon being that relevant. And without that overload, it's pretty much just a 2-mana Path to Exile. Even being able to path your own creature can come up at times, so I don't mind that. I don't mind Avens right now. Avens are pretty cool. There's a lot of decks that search, of course, being Depths and Elves, and then like Doomsday. If this was running a Grist, I'd probably run a Bayou and a Scrubland, and therefore I'd probably just run an Opposition Agent, because it's a little bit more hard for our opponents to get under, just because we get to actually exile something thanks to Opposition Agent. Prelates as well. I played D&T yesterday with XJ Cloud, and Prelate was our card in the main deck over the 4th Skyclave. And there were a lot of times where it just didn't really come up as being relevant. The Prelate is nice. Against Delver, it was okay, but they do have things like Rough Tumble or Submerge to get out of it. And it really makes, like, you have to be ahead, because if you Prelate on 1 and your opponent has like a Delver and a DRC, then your sword's being turned off to remove them is pretty high. The 3 forces are great. I've always wanted to find 3 forces. Ceratops did exactly what you want in the Blue-Red Duck matchup. 1 Endurance is nice, but I think I really want to have just a bigger hoser in the board. Like, I'd rather have Surgicals, potentially Leyline in a black build. Teeg was good. I still think Teeg is somewhat relevant in the metagame. It's good against Elves, not great, but I do think it does slow them down to the point where you actually get to build out a board that then they can't handle, which is exactly what you want from a Hate Bear. It's also quite nice against the Blue-White X decks, where things like Engineered Explosives, Prismatic Ending, Supreme Verdict, potentially Terminus, Jace, any sort of cards like Ruination, Gaddock Teeg keeps off the board. But Dress Down is just one of those cards that's like, oh, but they have Dress Down, so take it with a pinch of salt. I also think with Minsk and Boo on the uprise, we might also see an uptick in Karakas in a lot of decks, especially the Blue X decks. So Teeg there, of course, being answered by Karakas is kind of tough. Thalia was really nice. Thalia, though, I would say is more of a main deck card for me. It's not really a card that I think of like being a sideboard hose against any deck. It was great against Elves, but again, it would also be great against Elves in the main deck. So I think that like Thalia would be really cool. If anything, I'd probably bring the Thalias to the main deck. I think Tracker is just a nice one for like the decks where Knight isn't going to be too relevant, like the Blue-White X control decks that run a ton of basics. I think the Tracker is just a little bit better there at guaranteeing that value. So we could like move that over here. And then like maybe moving the Ooze to the main deck and having the second Endurance in the sideboard, just because Ooze in game 1 can be a lot harder to deal with by some decks than other times. Yeah, like really cool to see Joe playing around with different cards. Like it's very easy for me to say, you know, oh, Prelate is a thing of the past, and Thalia Heretic Cathar hasn't seen playing for ages. Why are we playing it? And actually saying, you know what, let's actually test it. Let's see how it goes in 2022. Let's run it through, obviously more than just one league, but put some reasoning behind card choices with practice instead of just being the person who goes, nah, that's old school. Let's not play that. So yeah, kudos to Joe for doing that, because I think with any deck that I make, there's always tweaks that can be made. And like a great finding here was that, hey, Blast Zone actually was doing really well. And Blast Zone gave me a lot of outs that otherwise I wouldn't have, that kept me in check. Like against Blue-Red Delver, I believe twice we ended up with two big threats in Delver and DRC. Against Elves, Blast Zone was fantastic. So right now I'm building a deck with Newton, and we just dropped a Bajuka Bog because it's a bit too slow for Knight of the Reliquary, whereas Newton is used to it with cards like Elvish Reclaimer and Crop Rotation. But I think Blast Zone could technically take that spot. Blast Zone is a pretty nice card. It has a lot of flexibility as well. And although, you know, there's people who are like, oh, we play a bunch of creatures that are 1 and 2 CMC, it just hurts us just as much. It's not always the case. Like, Blast Zone is a card that can be found through Knight, so it's not always going to be a case of you only being able to Blast Zone when you also have a board. Yeah, a huge thank you to Joe for sending through the list, and just for being one of the biggest supporters of the channel. I have a lot of time for Joe, and really appreciate his contribution to, yeah, keeping the Green Suns running, supporting me as a content creator, and yeah, just a big shout out to you, Joe. Really love your work. Hopefully I did okay during the league. I'm sure there's little things I missed out on, but if you want to type in the comments maybe a line you saw that was different to what I took, I'd love to hear it. Always looking to improve and see where maybe I missed out on something. But until then, if you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at twitter.com/Dukes on Twitch. You can find me at Patreon/GreenSunZenith. And of course here on YouTube. A huge thank you. Take care. We'll see you next time.